Hey, you guys, Erin here. I am dropping in to give you somewhat of a astrological forecast into this upcoming year of 2025. Things really look like extreme changes are coming through, and I mean coming through with force. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, the generational influencers are like the power players. They influence an entire generation because they're the slowest moving. They're all changing zodiac signs kind of within a few months of each other, which is a very, very rare occurrence. See, Uranus takes about 7 years to go through one zodiac sign. Neptune takes about 14 and a half years to go through one zodiac sign. Pluto will take anywhere between 12 and a half to 30 years to go through one zodiac sign. So these guys certainly aren't on the same cycle. So, and not only that, but when just one of them changes a zodiac sign, it's a big deal. But we've got all three of these guys changing signs. Plus, we'll have Saturn moving from the sign of Pisces into the sign of Aries briefly next year, which Saturn changes signs about every 2.5 years. And then we've got Jupiter moving into the sign of Cancer. So all of these guys are changing zodiac signs. And to be very specific, and part of the reason this is such a big deal is because when a planet comes to the end of a zodiac sign, it hits the 29th degree, which is called the anaretic degree, which is like things are coming in with a lot of force, but it can influence confusion. Okay. Then when it pops into the next zodiac sign over, it's like the first 0 to 2.5 degrees, the very beginning of a new zodiac sign. It's like the floodgates are opening. It comes in with an extreme force. Okay. And all of these guys, basically all of them which Pluto's already done, I think total 3 times now, moved into the next zodiac sign over, and then retrogrades back to the previous sign and then moves forward again. And that's really what's going on. So it's going from the anaretic degree into the 0 degrees. So these are very, very, very strong forces. And not only that, but when things are in retrograde, basically they're stronger. I mean, they're stronger, but it's wacky when things go into retrograde. If you just think about yourself driving a car, you don't drive as gracefully backwards than what you would going forwards. And so just a lot of this energy coming through. And I think the best way for me to break this down is in a chronological order. We're actually going to start with Pluto, which technically Pluto changed zodiac signs on November 19th, moved in from Capricorn into the sign of Aquarius. So I'll break them down as individuals. Then we'll go to March and we'll look at when Neptune moves into Aries. And then we'll go to May when Saturn moves into Aries. And we'll just kind of go through it chronologically and them as individuals and how they influence us through these zodiac signs. I'm also going to bring up some body parts because there's some really, really interesting stuff going on, especially with Pluto going into Aquarius. I think it's a good idea that we pay extra attention to the body parts that these zodiac signs rule. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about that. Then I'll wrap them all together, show you the aspects that they are making together. Basically, all these guys are like having conversations together, very strong conversations with each other. So I'll kind of put the puzzle pieces together. And I'm also going to talk about the United States natal chart, because this is a big one. Okay. The United States is approaching a Uranus return. And this is really, really interesting. What I'm going at here is that Uranus was in the sign of Gemini when the United States of America was established. Okay. 4th of July, 1776. And obviously the United States was established out of a war. Okay. And every time that Uranus has come back to the sign of Gemini, happens every 84 years. Uranus goes through the zodiac every 84 years. And every time the Uranus has come back to Gemini, the United States has gone into some kind of war, Civil War, World War II. And so that's what's going on with Uranus. So we'll apply this to the United States natal chart. And one more thing, I don't want to get too carried away here, but I also want to bring up Donald Trump's natal chart and how it kind of the compatibility between Donald Trump's natal chart and the United States natal chart. It's very, very aggressive, especially with this Uranus coming into the sign of Gemini. Okay, I don't want to scare anybody, but it does look like there's a potential for the United States going into some other kind of war. You know, I feel like we should all be used to going into some kind of war at some point here. We're just all sick of it, right? But it does look a little bit turbulent. And again, I don't want to scare anybody. There's also some things going on that look like over these next 20 years, which of course that's a very long time, but it's not really that long of a period of time. But there is this potential with Pluto going through Aquarius for the power to go back to the people. Okay, so that's kind of exciting, right? And I'll also talk a little bit about how to apply this to your own natal chart, because we all experience this as a collective, of course, but it's so unique to each and every one of us. It's like as a collective, we're going through these major changes, but also as individuals. If you've had a reading with me, you can go back and review the video recording to see where these things take place in your own natal chart and see if you've got any planets or celestial bodies that these things will be directly beaming onto. If you'd like to schedule a reading with me, you can schedule through erinwageastrology.com. You can schedule straight through my website, but I'll do the best I can to help you guys be able to interpret this stuff for yourself. Okay. I don't want to get carried away. I'm not going to go into every little detail, every date of when this ingress happens and when there's a retrograde and when it moves back into the sign, but I will leave a list. I've already got all the notes and I can just copy and paste that into the description below. If you're watching this on YouTube and you want specific dates of retrogrades and so on and so forth, just look in the description below and you'll find that there. I always try to wrap these things up in, about an hour or so. Okay, so let's start out by, I'm just going to pull up a chart here for November 19th, 2024. If you're new here, I work with geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we're looking at here is basically a snapshot of the tropical zodiac on November 19th, 2024. And I'm starting here because this is the day that Pluto makes his final ingress into that sign of Aquarius. Okay, so this right here is Pluto. This right here is the symbol or the glyph for the sign of Aquarius. If you're on a phone, it's probably difficult to see that. It's also a little bit of a bigger version of it right here. Okay, so Pluto is 0 degrees and 0 minutes Aquarius. Now, again, so here is the sign of Capricorn right here, where I move my mouse. Here's the sign of Aquarius. Pluto has been going through the sign of Capricorn since 2008, and again, has moved into the sign of Aquarius, but then retrograded back into Capricorn, and then moved forward again, and then retrograded back, and then moved forward again, but no more of that. Pluto is now in this sign of Aquarius until 2044. So the energy that we receive from Pluto, and that's important to understand as well, is we're always, it's not like any of these things ever go away. Of course, we're always experiencing the influence of Pluto and Uranus and Mars and all of these things. But sometimes they're stronger than others, depending on where they are in the zodiac. They're stronger than others, and all of them are working very, very forcefully right now. And not only that, but look to see in your natal chart if you have anything near, say, between 0 and 2.5 degrees Aquarius. Pluto is hitting that thing hard for your own personal experience here. Okay, so what Pluto influences is what's generally described as a transformational process or a death and rebirth process. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean somebody dying. It certainly can, but it's usually not, depending on what point we're at in our life and what's going on in our life, it's usually not necessarily a death of somebody. Okay, it's usually more of something in your life gets brought to death, and it's brutal, and it will take you down into the dark forces. Pluto is Hades in Greek mythology, which is the ruler of the underworld. Okay, so it's that influence from Pluto takes us down into, hypothetically speaking here, the underworld and shows us the dark, scary stuff. And if we flow through it, just as an example here, I think a really good example to use here is some sort of like a breakup or a divorce, because almost everybody's been through that at least once in their life. And if not, then you probably know at least one person that has been through it. And those are really turbulent experiences. Okay, so just as one example here, let's say you've got Venus in your natal chart at 1 degree Aquarius, and it's in your 7th house, the house of relationships. all of a sudden Pluto comes along, transiting Pluto comes along and hits that Venus in your natal chart. And you've been in a wonderful relationship for 10 years or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, something really awful happens. You find out that your partner or your husband or wife or whatever has not been faithful to you. And there's this breakup and it's awful. And, depending on the kind of person you are, it's like you don't eat for a week or you don't sleep for a week or whatever it is. You can't make it to work. And it's just devastating. But if we flow through that change as gracefully as possible and without causing any intentional harm to anybody, including ourselves, generally speaking, about, 2 years later, sometimes more, sometimes less, Pluto transits can take a couple of years. Okay. You can be empowered through that. Okay. We've probably all seen it before where somebody goes through terrible breakup and they're just a total mess. But then a year or two later, they have empowered themselves. They've started going to the gym and working out and they started getting really healthy, or they got a new job or something like that, that empowered them. They're like a whole new person through that Plutonian transformational death and rebirth process. Like the death of the relationship, actually, even though it was hard, it empowered a person. Okay. That is the kind of thing that Pluto influences. Okay. It doesn't necessarily always apply. It could be your career. It depends on where it's hitting in your own natal chart. It could just be your house of communication. And all of a sudden you're, starting to speak with more authority, something along those lines. So that's just what Pluto influences. Now, in the sign of Aquarius, the most dynamic sign of the zodiac, the sign of Aquarius is really the sign that influences revolutions. Okay. The sign of Aquarius, it's like the inventor or the scientist. It's the one that thinks outside of the box. It's the one that wants to create something new, have great new ideas, that sort of thing. And by the way, that does not mean that every single person who's born under the sign of Aquarius is going to be an inventor or come up with new ideas, because there's always so much more to somebody's natal chart than just their sun sign. Okay. But a lot of people are born with either a sun in Aquarius or Aquarius rising, Mercury in Aquarius, something along those lines. They are the ones that come up with new revolutionary ideas. The sign of Aquarius is very much the sign of technology, things that are, revolutionary and new. It's the sign, it's a very electrical energy. Even the glyph for the sign of Aquarius is kind of like radio waves. Okay. So it's very much this out with the old, in with the new kind of energy that we receive from the sign of Aquarius. Not only that, but most of us have heard, we're going into this age of Aquarius. This might help you understand the sign of Aquarius well. It's like, it's the water bearer. It's not a water sign. It's an air sign. In astrology, water is very strongly associated with emotions and feelings. But what the water bearer does, the sign of Aquarius does, is it detaches the emotions from the water and turns the water into information. One of the key words to describe the sign of Aquarius is actually detached. It's sometimes described as cold and detached because it wants to learn from the experience. It doesn't want to get wrapped up in the emotions. So it turns the water into information and then pours the water out for all of humanity. It's very much the sign of humanity and humanitarianism. It pours the water out as information. Water is always going to distribute evenly. And so this is why we are literally getting flooded with information right now, especially through the form of technology. Okay, because we're going into this age of Aquarius. And all the, the 5G towers, the Wi-Fi, the devices everybody's walking around with a phone in their hand. Something that's fairly new to all of humanity. Well, here comes Pluto, basically the destroyer, to create a more powerful rebirth, coming through this sign of Aquarius for the next 20 years. Now, this could manifest in so many different ways in all different locations all over the world. But just as an example here, let's say the grid goes down. Let's say all of a sudden, we all lose our internet or we all lose our, electricity. Something like that just gets hit because Pluto's just that turbulent. But then, and I know this might sound crazy to some people, But I actually know, like personally know people who have been coming up with ways to achieve free energy. Okay. Like Tesla stuff even beyond what Tesla was doing. I don't know anybody who's been able to create enough free energy to power an entire household. But start a light bulb and all kinds of neat things like that. Some new invention comes along over these next 20 years where we actually can tap into that free energy. Something along those lines very well could occur. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen in the year of 2025. It could, but we shall see. Okay, so keep in mind that's a 20-year transit. And also, this sign of Aquarius, it rules the calves, it rules the shins, it rules the ankles. And so, of course, especially if you've got something prominent in your natal chart in the first few degrees of Aquarius, you might want to be careful with your calves and your shins and your ankles. But the sign of Aquarius also rules what is generally called the electrical body. Okay, what I'm talking about here is the toroidal field. I know not everybody knows what the toroidal field is, but this is actually something that has been talked about for a very long time. But over, I'd say maybe the last 15 years, that might maybe between 10 and 50 years, they've been able to prove this. There's a place that's called the Heart Math Institute that has been able to prove the electrical pulses that come from our heart and create what kind of is like in the shape of a donut that goes around every human. Okay. And it's the electromagnetic field. The sign of Aquarius rules that. Okay. And so with that said, that might be a good idea to keep our electromagnetic field as clean as possible. And ways to achieve that are pretty simple. Maybe try to spend a little less time with our devices. I mean, honestly, even using our phones while they're plugged in is a terrible idea. There's all kinds of there's a website called lessemf.com, and honestly, just going outside and putting our bare feet on the ground for at least 10 minutes a day, but not everybody's going to be able to do that. An hour a day would be fantastic. You'll actually feel it. You'll feel it in your body. And I know it's hard to get into a rhythm to do something like that, but I do think that these upcoming years, that's something that we should all really try to go after. Another thing that this sign of Aquarius rules is the quality of the blood, not the blood. Like the sign of Aquarius does not rule the blood, but it rules the quality of the blood. And I have found this absolutely fascinating to watch this unfold as Pluto has moved into the sign of Aquarius and then retrograded back. And again, when they're in retrograde, it's blah. So tick-tocking back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius over these last few years. And over these last few years, there's been all kinds of evidence showing up that people are getting very strange blood clots showing up. Even, people get autopsies. They're finding these weird, long, stringy things inside of people's blood. And, there's some suspicions about where that has come from. But regardless, it's the quality of the blood. That's something I think we also all need to be very mindful of. There's all kinds of ways to detoxify the blood. Even just eating raw red beets on a more regular basis would help keep the blood clean, or beet powder. There's so many ways we can go about this. And I'm not a doctor. I can't offer any kind of medical advice whatsoever. So I'm very careful and mindful about things that I say here. But that is something that I would definitely be paying pretty darn close attention to. Our electrical bodies, really the entire field around us, and the quality of our blood, making sure our blood does not become corrupt. This information, most of this information comes from the Encyclopedia of Medical Astrology by Cornell. And also I've learned a lot of this through Judith Hill's Academy for Astrological Medicine. And most of this is totally ancient information. So there's that. There's Pluto in Aquarius. Again, that entered on November 19th, 2024. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move forward to March, when Neptune enters into the sign of Aries. I believe it is March 30th. Okay, so we will set this for March 30th. There it is. Okay, so here is Neptune. Here's the symbol for the sign of Aries. This whole thing right here is the sign of Aries. This little slice of pie right here is the sign of Aries. Well, All right, let's kind of digress for a minute here. Neptune has been going through the sign of Pisces since 2012. Okay, and we've seen what Neptune influences is a very spiritual and mystical experience. Neptune is aggressive, but not. Neptune's an aggressive energy in the sense that aggressive with fogginess. If somebody's having a really heavy Neptune transit, like let's say Neptune's going over their sun and then retrograding back, and that is a time where it becomes very, very difficult to concentrate. In fact, Neptune directly rules over drugs, and not necessarily stimulating drugs, but rather more like opioids and muscle relaxers and even, cannabis, that sort of thing. Neptune rules altered states of consciousness, okay? Dreams. Neptune can be great for creativity as long as you don't have to totally focus on something, because Neptune can actually make things quite confusing, and has been going through the sign of Pisces, again, since 2012. But Neptune rules Pisces. That's the sign of Pisces is recognized for the dreams and the flowiness and the spiritualism and even things like drug addictions or alcoholism, that sort of thing. And so Neptune's been beaming through that sign Pisces, watching, the epidemics and the fentanyl situation is just, it's awful. It's awful to see what's been going on. And I do feel like Neptune going through Pisces has had something to do with that. But also Neptune going through Pisces, for some people, has brought an extreme spiritual awakening. As I've said so many times, some people I'm just totally flabbergasted, because people I never would have thought are all of a sudden super, into spiritual teachings and that sort of thing. They've always been very practical their whole life. All of a sudden Neptune transits over their Mercury or something, and they're all of a sudden going to, spiritual retreats and that sort of thing. So that's been, the pros of that. But now Neptune entering into the sign of Aries, very different energy. Aries is the warrior. Okay. Aries is the cardinal fire sign. Aries is, when I say cardinal, I'm talking about force. And all the fire signs are very directly associated with energy. Aries is forceful energy. Okay. This is aggressive energy. It's ruled by Mars, which Mars is often referred to as the planet of war. That's why Aries is the warrior. Okay. Now, this arguably is something that's already been going on for thousands of years, but it very well could be coming much more into our face and much more into fruition, is spiritual warfare. Something along those lines, especially when Saturn catches up to Neptune. This is going to be really a very, very interesting transit for all of us. But again, look to see in your own natal chart where this sign of Aries comes through. What house in your natal chart does the sign of Aries rule? Let's just, as an example, let's say if the sign of Aries comes through your house of career, your 10th house, and all of a sudden things with your career get really confusing, or maybe some sort of a spiritual aspect is brought into your career. That sort of thing can happen. But I do think that we're in for some interesting times. Not only that, but there's also Neptune moving into Aries. I think it was the Civil War. I can look at my notes. I don't remember exactly, but it was like the United States went into war the day after Neptune moved into Aries, but at the same time that Uranus was in the sign of Gemini. So that's also that. It's just because that Aries energy is so aggressive. Now, also in the body, the sign of Aries rules the head, the top of the head. It rules the brain. It actually kind of rules all, like from the top jaw, okay, all the way up here. So again, especially if you've got some prominent planet or celestial body in the sign of Aries, might want to be very, very careful with that area of your body. Things might, again, get really foggy, and really be careful not to fall into some sort of a drug addiction. But also, Aries rules the pineal gland, okay? And in fact, the sign of Pisces here and the sign of Aries, they come together. They both rule the pineal gland. And that pineal gland, not everybody's even heard of the pineal gland, but it's what makes our reality our reality. It produces DMT. It's what makes us dream. It's what makes us see things. It's how we experience this entire, lifetime and previous lifetimes and future lifetimes. The pineal gland is so massively important. And unfortunately, because of, the way that the vast majority of us have lived our lives, we've been, example, using microwaves. We've been eating seed oils. We've been all kinds of weird things. We've been eating heavily processed foods, meats that have been, heavily injected with all kinds of weird stuff before they went into our bodies. Fluoride in the water. All of these things could be terrible for the pineal gland. Fluoride especially, it's like calcifying to the pineal gland. So with that said, I think a lot of us our pineal gland is not functioning optimally. There are ways to help, clear that up. I mean, seriously, this simplest things, even just consuming things like real, true, raw apple cider vinegar, put a little splash of it in your water. That can help even, help the pineal gland get activated. Meditation is a fantastic thing for really activating the pineal gland. But with that said, since Neptune is moving from one sign that rules the pineal gland into the next sign that rules the pineal gland, and then going to retrograde back and then move forward again, especially at the 29th degree to the first degree, the 0 degrees to really 2.5 degrees, I think that is something that we should all really be paying very, very close attention to. Okay, now I'm going to move forward here to May, when Saturn joins Neptune. This is really, really interesting stuff. I think it actually joins on the 24th of May. Go back here to the 24th. Yeah, it's the evening of the 24th. So I'm just going to go to the 25th here. So here's Neptune, which would have moved to 1 degree, 44 minutes, Aries. Here's Saturn that moves into the sign of Aries. They're so close together. When any two celestial bodies are very close to each other, it's called a conjunction. And basically, they just want to blend together and work as one. Now, this really couldn't be any more difficult to interpret here because Saturn is so different than Neptune. Saturn wants discipline. Saturn wants responsibilities to be taken care of. Saturn is very cold. Saturn is very astringent. Saturn makes things tight. Okay. And so it's like here we have Neptune, foggy, dreamy Neptune, which, by the way, Neptune is Poseidon in Greek mythology, the god of the sea. And then we've got Saturn, which is Kronos in Greek mythology. It was a bit of a tyrant. Okay. They're coming together, and it's where I'm going with this is I wonder and I hope that this could potentially, Saturn brings ends to things. Saturn's often referred to as the bringer of death. And again, just like I talked about Pluto, it doesn't mean that you're going to die just because Pluto's hitting something in your chart. It doesn't mean you're going to die if Saturn's hitting something in your chart, but it's the death of something, okay? It's generally the death of you being able to blow off of something that you're supposed to be responsible about. But I am curious because what's going to happen between 2025 and 2026 is Saturn's actually going to transit over Neptune. And I'm hoping that that can do something like bring an end to this opioid drug epidemic. It's so severe at this point. And so I'm really hoping that that can help with that. But then also keep in mind that Saturn is doing this dance between those signs that rule that part of the brain. So we've got Neptune making it like, whoa, kind of, where am I? But then we've also got Saturn going, like tightening things up in that area of the body. And that really does go for everybody, but especially if you have something in your natal chart in the first few degrees of Aries. Okay, so there's that. Now, moving forward here, I think we're going to go to June when Jupiter moves into the sign of Cancer. What date was that again? Bear with me while I check my notes here. Jupiter moves into Cancer on June 9th. Okay, so, oops, I'll just go to June 10th. That'll work just fine. Okay, so here's Jupiter. So Jupiter is generally referred to as a great benefic. Jupiter is wonderful. Jupiter brings abundance and luck and wisdom and philosophy, and Jupiter expands the consciousness, wants us to look at the big grand picture of things. Jupiter actually rules things like religion, not any one particular kind of religion, but the faith that comes with religion. And Jupiter exalts in the sign of Cancer. This is Jupiter's favorite zodiac sign to be in. It's like he gets to be extra charitable in the sign of Cancer. And of course, again, that's as the collective, we all receive that abundance from Jupiter coming through the sign of Cancer. However, it's going to be unique to everybody. It's going to be very different for everybody. Let's say you've got Cancer ruling your house of career, your 10th house. All of a sudden, your Jupiter comes through and expands your career and brings you abundance to your career. Or maybe you've got Cancer ruling your second house, your house of finances, and all of a sudden, I don't know, you won some sort of a lottery or something, like all of a sudden great finances come in. It could be wonderful for some people. But for other people, if you've got a malefic, let's say you've got Saturn or Mars at 0 degrees Cancer, and all of a sudden Jupiter hits that thing and makes, when I say the malefics, Saturn and Mars are the malefics. Saturn rules chronic disease. Mars rules more like injuries and inflammation. And all of a sudden Jupiter hits one of those things in your natal chart, and it might not be the greatest transit. So again, it's unique for each and every one of us. But I do think as a collective, I'm grateful that Jupiter will enter into the sign of Cancer. I think that might be a little bit of a saving grace. But also Jupiter, well, when I pull up the United States natal chart, you'll see this. The United States, I don't know what they were thinking signing the Declaration of Independence when they did at the time that they did, because it's like the sun, Jupiter, Mercury, I can't remember what else, but in the United States is all in the sign of Cancer in the 8th house. So we'll be having the United States will be having a Jupiter return in the 8th house, which is the house of death and rebirth. Also has a lot to do with debt and taxes. So that is very, very interesting. Okay, now we're going to move forward to when Uranus moves into Gemini. Let's see here. That happens on July 7th, just a few days after 4th of July. Okay, so here we are. Here's Uranus right here, which has been going through the sign of Taurus, again, since 2018. Okay, now what Uranus influences is very abrupt changes. As we talked about, the sign of Aquarius it's like the rebel with new ideas, okay? Well, that's in part because Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius. Uranus is very spasmodic, very unpredictable, but Uranus wants change and wants it abruptly. Uranus, you could say in essence that Uranus rules electricity, but that's not exactly accurate. It's more like Uranus brings like a zappiness. It almost like disrupts an electromagnetic field. And again, we're always receiving Uranus's energy, but it's sometimes Uranus is going to be stronger than others, and definitely going to be strong for this transit here. Because, okay, when we go talk about Uranus having been going through the sign of Taurus, Taurus is very much the sign of money and finances and food, okay? Think about the crazy changes that we have seen, abrupt changes that we have seen since 2018, while Uranus has been going through that sign of Taurus. I mean, Zelle, Venmo, PayPal was probably there before that, but all these different new ways of exchanging, finances, paying somebody this through that app, and, Apple Pay, all these new wild things that have come out. And the food, in my opinion, Uranus can be great, but at the same time can also not be so great. And when I think about like what's gone on with our agricultural systems and things being genetically modified and things, them spraying all kinds of weird stuff on the crops, and it's almost impossible to get something that's actually really, really, truly organic, even if you're growing it from your own soil at home, depending on where you live. But there's stuff being sprayed in the air and all kinds of crazy stuff. Uranus is brought all had a huge influence on all those really abrupt changes to those things. Now moving into the sign of Gemini. So this is so crazy because Gemini it's an air sign. For those of you who understand a little bit about astrology, you can understand that if you think about the sign of Gemini and you think about what Uranus influences, it's such a spazzy connection because the sign of Gemini, it's the mutable air sign. It's the motto is I think. It's the social butterfly. The sign of Gemini, it's very much the sign of communication. That's why it's the social butterfly. And again, that doesn't mean that every single person who's a Gemini is going to be the social butterfly, because there's, again, so much more to the natal chart. They're a Gemini and they were born with their sun right next to Saturn in the south node, changes things. But the sign of Gemini in and of itself, when I say mutable air, okay, air is very strongly associated with intellect in astrology. Mutable means it's adaptable. This is the sign of duality. It's the sign that's like, I go this way. Well, no, I'm going to go that way. Yep, I'm going to go that way. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to go that way. I'm going to go this way. And meanwhile, the whole time thinking, overthinking sometimes. The sign of Gemini, it rules the lungs. It rules most of the arms. It doesn't rule the elbows. The elbows fall into the sign of Cancer. But it does rule the fingers, but it also has an influence on the lungs. If you guys already have a lung condition, you might have Jupiter going through Gemini might have been a little bit harsh, but now Uranus going through Gemini, I do think it's a very good idea to do something to support our lungs. But Gemini also has a massive influence on really the entire nervous system. Very specifically, it's the afferent nerves. Sign of Sagittarius rules the efferent nerves, but the polarity between these signs influences the entire nervous system. Okay, and so we've got spasmodic Uranus entering into the sign that rules over our nervous system. I think all of us, especially with Pluto going through Aquarius, might be a little bit on overdrive. Again, especially if you've got something prominent in your natal chart. If it's Sun or Mercury or maybe even your rising sign or your moon near 0 degrees Gemini, I'm like thinking of clients who have this and I'm just thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I feel like I should reach out to them because it could be like shocking. Something goes on that's so left field, something that, hits the nervous system. It doesn't necessarily like all of a sudden your nervous system goes crazy. It's more like something happens in your home or whatever it is, in your environment, something that happens out here that all of a sudden is like, oh my gosh, my nervous system is going crazy right now. So I do think it's a really good idea, especially because, again, just like the other guys, Uranus moves into Gemini for a few months and then retrogrades back into Taurus. And that retrograde it's especially Uranus. Out of all of them, I'd say Uranus and Pluto. When they go retrograde, they're like Uranus is extra spazzy, okay, extra zappy. And so with Uranus doing this TikTok thing, I think it's really a very good idea to support the nervous system. For myself, I really like to indulge. I mean, hops is really strong. That's probably why I like it. But there's also, lemon balm. There's milky oats or oat tops are really good for the nervous system. Those are a little more not quite as strong as hops. I don't know why, but I get along with hops really well. But again, also meditation or just going outside, getting out into nature and trying not to let the things that are going on around you, overstimulate you too much. And not only that, but I would also be very, very mindful of the way that you're communicating with people. Also, the sign of Gemini, like I said, it's the sign of communication, has a lot to do with things like social media. With Pluto going through Aquarius, especially in the United States' 3rd house, which is the house of communication, plus Uranus going through Gemini for these next 7 years, I seriously think that there is going to be massive changes to social media. I'm hopeful here that it's because we all have to be so careful. Maybe not all of us, but so many of us have to be very, very careful about the words we use, the way that we present information. I mean, I've got several friends whose entire channel was completely shut down, deleted. And they didn't even, in my opinion, they didn't even do anything that was, that bad. It was more like they were sending out information that the people in charge, we'll call them that, don't want that information being put out there. All of a sudden, fact checkers pop up or whatever. And I have my own personal feelings about the fact checker stuff. It's not everybody's going to feel the same way about it, but I'm hoping that we can actually really have free speech. We can actually really, because that's how we solve things, is by calmly talking about it. And so something like that could happen, could manifest. We might get a little bit more free speech involving our social media sites. There might be new ways. There's always these crazy updates going on with Telegram, Zoom, everything. Everything's always being automatically updated. And there could be something that updates or changes that is just inconceivable to us at this point over these next 7 years with Uranus going through the sign of Gemini. So that's really strong stuff. Now, I think probably what I should point out now is I'm going to put all these little guys, all these puzzle pieces together. So, and by the way, this is Venus right here. Venus moves much quicker, but hallelujah, Venus will be very close to Uranus when the first entrance into the sign of Gemini that Uranus makes. Venus can kind of calm things down. She's the planet of love, and she likes to soothe. She can be a remedy for things. She can calm things. So Venus is our friend here. So here's Uranus, okay? Here's Neptune, here's Saturn, here's Pluto. If you notice these aspects, when I say aspects, I'm talking about, it's like the rays that one planet is beaming towards another. And it's quite literally like they are having an energetic conversation, okay? And for the most part, these are really good aspects. We've got sextiles going from Uranus to Saturn and Neptune, and we've got a sextile going from Saturn and Neptune over to Pluto, and we've got a trine going from Pluto to Uranus. Trines and sextile aspects, they're generally thought of as like the good aspects, but all of these are power players. All of these are heavy hitters. And I'm going to just give you a brief little history lesson here with Greek mythology, because it's literally like, it's like a family reunion of sorts, but with all masculine dudes that have battled each other in the past. It's grandpa, it's father, and the 3 sons. And the sons are adult sons. And so Uranus here, he's the grandfather, okay? And was considered by some to be a tyrant. Well, here comes Saturn, Uranus's son, which would be called Kronos. Okay, I don't want to make this too much in depth because I'm going to confuse some people, but Saturn is basically Uranus's son, S-O-N, okay, son. And Saturn completely battled Uranus. It took over the whole, the whole tribe. He actually, in the story, cut off his father's, Uranus's, testicles. That's a battle right there, okay? Then we've got, then Saturn's in charge, okay? Then Saturn's the tyrant. Kronos is the tyrant. Well, Saturn has children, and he keeps eating them. Every time his wife has a baby, he eats the baby. And it's just a really pretty awful character, Kronos was. So the 3 sons that are like the key players here are Jupiter, which is Zeus, Neptune, which is Poseidon, and Pluto, which is Hades, okay? And those guys, so then Zeus, to make the long story short here, Zeus and Poseidon and Hades, or in other words, Jupiter and Neptune and Poseidon. Jupiter, it's Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, or in other words, Jupiter and Neptune and Pluto. They go and they battle Kronos, Saturn, and they take over. Okay, they take over. So that's probably really hard to follow along if you don't know, if you're not familiar with the story already, but I did the best I could. To make a long story short here, they all are aggressive, masculine, dominant energies that are all having these conversations together almost throughout the entire year. And here we have Jupiter, which would be squaring. A square is not a friendly aspect. A square creates a force. It can be very good for making things happen. It forces things to happen, but it usually comes with a lot of internal tension. With Jupiter, which is Zeus, one of Kronos's or Saturn's sons, who Zeus is really the one who really took over, they're squaring each other as they're entering into these new signs. So this is a combination of a lot of really, really wild changes going on. And I really, if you're not familiar with your natal chart, this is the time to become familiar with your natal chart so you can see how this is going to manifest for yourself and try to flow through it so that you're not sitting there going, what the hell is going on in my life? You can see it manifest through your chart. Okay, so now I think what's best is for me to pull up the United States natal chart and show you what's going on here. All right, so again, what we're working with here is the tropical zodiac. I've got it set for July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Okay, so this is what I was talking about earlier. So the United States, and there are other charts. If you're going into the super fine little details of things, yes, of course, there are other charts that are good to use for the United States, but this is, I don't want to get into all that stuff. It shows us enough. Okay, so here is the sun, here's Jupiter, here's Venus, here's Mercury. This is something called the Law of Fortune. But all of these things in the sign of Cancer for the United States, okay, which the motto for the sign of Cancer is I feel, but it's coming through the 8th house. This is the house of death and rebirth. This is the house that rules over things like debt and taxes, okay? That's the United States natal chart. But also, so here's Uranus. So Uranus in the United States chart here is at 8 degrees Gemini. We won't have the technical Uranus return for another, I think it's 3 years from now. We will have the first Uranus return. What's going to happen is Uranus up in the sky will come up. It'll transit over the natal Uranus and then retrograde back and then move forward again. And that's a little unnerving because, again, that is when we've had a very strong tendency to go to war. In fact, let's see here. I got some of this stuff in my notes. So first we had during this period, 1776, that's when Uranus was in Gemini. But then also between 1858 and 1866 was the Civil War. That's when we also had Uranus going through the sign of Gemini. And then 1941 to 1948, that was World War II. Okay. And in fact, let's see if I also took some other notes here. So, oh goodness. And the United States Civil War, that was, again, when Uranus was in Gemini, but it's also, as we talked about, Neptune is moving into the sign of Aries. Okay. That is the day after that Neptune moved into the sign of Aries is the day that we, went to battle. And so there's some very interesting connections going on there. Moreover, and I think part of the reason that the United States ends up going to war with Uranus going into Gemini is because we've got Mars here in the sign of Gemini, which Mars is, again, the planet of war. Okay. And Uranus is abrupt. Uranus has testicles chopped off. Okay. So he's aggressive. And so that also could have something to do with it. And this is in the 7th house, which is very much the house of contracts. Okay. It's usually referred to as the house of relationships. Sure. It could be relationships that we have with other countries or the relationships that we have with it, like if it was another civil war, relationships that we have with each other. And that's in part why the elections stuff makes me crazy because it's like, I just see it. This person wanted this person to win. This person wanted this person to win. And these people practically hate each other because they can't agree on who will win. But then there's so many other things. Both of those people who can't get along, for the most part, they just want what's best for everybody. They're just being programmed with this person thinks that's going to, make things better. This person thinks that person's going to make things better. And it's just so, it's so exhausting. But potentially that could play a role in this, especially because, in fact, you know what? I feel like maybe I should just pull up to show you what I'm talking about here. Yeah, 2025. Okay. This inner wheel, that's the chart we were just looking at. We're going to call it the United States natal chart. The outer wheel, this is where all the planets and celestial bodies will be on the day, on July 7th, the first day that Uranus moves into the sign of Gemini. Here it is, it's 0 degrees Gemini, moves in there. And so it's a Uranus return is when Uranus, it'll move along here. Again, it's going to retrograde back into Taurus at the midpoint of 2025, and then move back up here into the sign of Gemini again in 2026. And then we'll tick, 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 tick along here and hit the Uranus return, which could be very, very interesting times for the United States. But then we'll move along. I think it'll probably be about 5-6 years, the first time Uranus hits the Mars, the United States Mars. So that actually could be, you know, like 5-6 years from now, that could potentially be the actual potential time for war. Now, another thing I need to point out, and I get it, this could probably be very, very confusing for some people if you've never, you know, looked at any kind of astrology before, but just follow along as best as you can. Oh, actually, before I do that, let me show you this Jupiter transit. So here's Jupiter, which again, in June of 2025, moves into the sign of Cancer, which it will transit over all of these things over between June of 2025 to July of 2026. Jupiter is going to move along here through the 8th house of death and rebirth and transformation and debt and taxes. And Jupiter expands things. Jupiter makes things a bigger deal. That could be a wonderful thing, or that could be a terrible thing. I'm hoping that the United States Jupiter return, which would be about on July 7th. Actually, it'll be just the first week of July, the first time that Jupiter goes over the United States natal Jupiter. Okay, that could be a good thing. It could be a good thing. That could help with inflation, or again, it could make things horrible. Okay, now I'm going to pull up here Mr. Donald Trump's natal chart. Okay, so here we have. If you didn't see my video about, I broke down Donald Trump's natal chart a couple times. I actually kind of threw out a prediction that he would win, which he did. Okay, so just his natal chart here is all I want to see. Okay, so we just looked at the United States natal chart, and if you remember, Mars was at 21 degrees Gemini. Mars is, again, the planet of war. Well, here in Donald Trump's natal chart is his sun and his north node and his own natal Uranus. Okay, so he's actually approaching a Uranus return as well. That'll happen in about 4 years, about 4.5 years. He'll have a Uranus return. That can be very, very abrupt, big changes for Mr. Donald Trump. But it's more, what's really standing out to me is the United States Mars sits right between Donald Trump's sun, his inner being, and his north node. Okay, the north node, the dragon's head, the part that brings energy in. It's in part associated with our destiny. Okay, so it very well could be this aggressiveness that comes through. Donald Trump has to do something super aggressive. And this is what I said in that video, that I made this prediction that Donald Trump would win. But if he did, I think things are going to be actually even like crazier, like kind of even more aggressive. But again, the beauty of it is I do feel that, especially with Pluto transiting through the sign of Aquarius over these next 20 years, there is very good potential for the people to get their power back. Okay. In my own opinion, I feel like, especially in 2020, oh my gosh, we had so much transiting through the sign of Capricorn. And that sign of Capricorn, it's really like the sign of government. Okay. And we had Pluto, we had Saturn, we had Mars, we had South Node, we had Jupiter. It was just, oh my gosh, all cutting through the sign of Capricorn. And I do feel like the government really overstepped. And I do feel like that left an imprint on a lot of people, like, wait a minute here. And so I feel like more and more people are starting to stand up to those things. Okay, now really quickly here, remember to look for, we're just going to use Mr. Donald Trump's here chart as an example. Remember to look for where the sign of Aries, where the sign of Gemini, and where the sign of Aquarius comes through your own natal chart. And do you have any planets or celestial bodies in the first few degrees of those signs? Or really, if you have any planets or celestial bodies, including asteroids, midpoints, or even the rising, within the first few degrees of any zodiac sign at all, because there will be some sort of a connection going on there. Okay, I think I better leave that there. Again, if you'd like to schedule an astrology reading, please do visit erinwageastrology.com. I do hope to hear from some of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.